Even when you win, you have lost. Because you've lost lives, you've lost efforts. You've lost things that you could have used differently.
It's a chilly, misty morning. Through the dense fog, a piper leads a procession. They're honoring those soldiers who fell many decades ago. The tombstones sit idle. They're numerous, row upon row.
When you go to the cemetery, that's when it starts to hurt. When you see all those graves, eh? And you look at them, you don't know them, but you know they were one of us anyway. And that's the hardest part of it. Although that's what we're coming for, to remember them.
Over 4,200 Commonwealth graves are located here in Cassino, Italy. 200 are unknown, 855 Canadian. Those who died were men and women of another generation. They chose to fight, whether for country, the greater good, or simply for an out-of-this-world adventure. Their dreams left unfulfilled, families ripped apart, names only now known through the carved letters etched into granite headstones.
The cemetery, when you and the setting is really quite exceptional.
David Morton of Boys of Ain, Manitoba, is one of the veterans who fought on the very same soil where he now walks, gazing at the headstones one after another. Morton is part of a Canadian delegation that is commemorating the 65th anniversary of the Italian campaign during World War II. The group will spend a week visiting key battlegrounds and the large cemeteries like this one.
Without veterans, the trip kind of diminishes in a way, and to see the look in their eyes and the way that they stand up a little crooked, a little bent over, but still saluting, still proud of what they've done, and you can only imagine what thoughts go through their mind and the stories that they don't tell.
Along with the veterans are federal politicians, senators, and others who also have a connection to the Italian campaign.
This is the headstone of one of the members of the number 1 Provo Corps for the RCMP that served during the Second World War. Commissioner Woods, the commissioner of the day, he developed the number 1 Provo Corps to support the Canadian Corps here in Europe. We lost 9 members of the RCMP in that war. So Italy is a very significant place of memorial for the RCMP.
The view from a neighboring hilltop shows the sheer size of the cemetery, headstones as plentiful as droplets during a spring rain. The war in Italy was no small effort for Allied forces. To liberate the country, there were 3 key battlegrounds: Sicily, Ortona, and Rimini. War zones that came at a cost. 93,000 everyday Canadians left their normal lifestyles back home to cross the Atlantic and take up arms in Italy. Lives that were forever changed. The war arena of Italy was as gory as any other battleground in Europe. It was front-page news back home, but as the campaign progressed, it was pushed to newspaper back pages. It continues to be overlooked and overshadowed today. In the majority of Canadian high schools, the campaign is never even mentioned. The youth of a country oblivious to the horrors past generations endured. Even the colorful stories of triumph left only as simple black and white images in military archives. Brawn begone, deaths diminished. This is the forgotten campaign. Thousands of men in dozens of boats approached the southern island off the Italian mainland. German planes soared overhead, dropping every bomb their aircraft could carry. For the majority of these Canadians, it was their first experience overseas. The rocking ships, the explosion of bombs, the sight of planes roaring through the sky. No wonder the Allied troops, fresh off joining the ranks, were now scared for their lives.
Well, if anybody says they weren't, they're foolish. They all were, sure. So we never knew what's going to happen.
Rolly Demers of Windsor, Ontario, was an engineer with the Canadian Army, dispatched to Italy with a wide range of duties.
helping build bridges, and there was an awful lot of them to build. As you've seen, there's a lot of ravines around here. So the Germans had bombed their bridges all the time to slow us up. So we were putting some more up. They put a couple of us engineers with the infantry in these landing barges, and our job was to probe for mines so they wouldn't step on any mines, like, you know. The only thing is we got off there and we were probing for mines, but they weren't waiting, so we just put our probes down, we took off with them. We were very, very surprised. We had basically nobody to fight with, put it that way. The Italians didn't want to fight. It's not that they were cowards, but I think they appreciate us landing.
When we were going into the harbor, the planes were still going over, bombing, and we, of course, were put down below, but our hospital ship, as we went in, it was hit, and it sunk, of course, to the bottom, with all our supplies on it. So when we got off, the British movements officers who were in charge of this were absolutely flabbergasted, because here are nursing sisters. What are we going to, they couldn't believe it.
For nursing sisters like Betty Brown of Winnipeg, the bombing of supply ships meant a change of plans. Medical supplies and even their uniforms were at the bottom of the ocean.
Fedora hats, blue suits, blue shirts and ties, silk stockings, shoes like this, and landed. We couldn't progress any further in that kind of an outfit. So they took us aside and put the other ranks, the boys' uniforms on us.
It was the beginning of the journey through Italy. Soldiers on the front lines, support staff not far behind.
We were very proud to be able to follow them, and eventually, when we couldn't get buildings to put our cots in and look after them, in a building, we reverted to tents.
The assault on Sicily was the largest amphibious invasion yet during the war. It was the first exposure for these Canadian soldiers to the cruelty that is warfare, already undermanned after the German bombing.
We lost, I think, two big ships with all of our vehicles and stuff like that on, and we had to use mules and that to pack our stuff up and to bring like rations up to us and bring up food and ammunition and stuff like that.
From his home in Medicine Hat, Doug Wyatt remembers trudging on the beaches of Sicily. It was a new climate for the soldiers, the guns, explosions, even the weather, which at times meant pouring rain followed by long stretches of searing heat.
Oh God, it was hot. In fact, I remember getting shot at one time, and it was so darn hot I didn't even run. I just kept walking.
This summer is extra warm. Too damn hot. Pardon the language.
Do you remember what the conditions were like?
Yes, I certainly do, because they weren't very good at all. It was very rainy, wet time that just after we arrived.
Persevering through the elements, their first mission was complete.
As the Canadians reached the end of the first chapter in the liberation of Europe,
Sicily was conquered in 38 days. The invasion of the mainland was next, and the challenge would be tougher, fiercer, and costlier. The march to Ortona had begun. Entering the city of Ortona exposes soldiers to a new landscape, one of urban warfare. Liberating this stronghold meant navigating the narrow, snaking streets, or else slowly tunneling from one building to another, often referred to as mouse-holing.
In Ortona, it's a door-to-door affair. It's a room-to-room, house-to-house, building-to-building. It was not easy. It was, again, something man-to-man. The Battle of Ortona was something which is undescribable. Very rough, very heavy. It was not an easy affair.
Knowing the combat firsthand is Tony Di Giacomo. He's an Italian who lived through the German occupation.
Ortona is the kind of country very difficult to get through. It isn't the battleground was difficult, very difficult.
After the war, Di Giacomo moved to Canada in the 1950s, calling Edmonton and then Medicine Hat home. He's now living back in Ortona, his childhood home where he, his family, and neighbors endured brutal, inhumane conditions. Occupation was slavery.
We were dying, not only from bombs, not from bombardment, but also from the hungry. There was no food, there was nothing. The occupation lasted 6 months. And that was a long time, you know, for the people to survive without food. Ortona was all demolished. 90% demolished.
For veterans, revisiting the landscape 65 years later is something most never thought they would experience, seeing the same streets, fields, and valleys where they spent some of the most incredulous days of their lives.
Everything is changed. When I came through here, it was all rubble, most of it.
Ortona has added significance for veteran Henry Beaudry of the Sweetgrass First Nations Reserve in Saskatchewan.
I got wounded. The sniper was, the town was below here, and the sniper kept shooting me, but he got me at the last.
He kept fighting, but days later his situation became worse. His battalion couldn't control a counterattack by the Nazis.
I had no ammunition, and the Germans were coming in the door, you know. We lost a lot of men. That first part, we went in, we lost 65 men in about half an hour. Oh, it was awful. When I first got captured, I couldn't hear nothing for 2 days. I was just completely deaf, you know. And after that, it came to.
Captured on December 13, 1944, Henry was a prisoner of war. On boxcars, he was taken from Italy to Austria, then Germany. But his misfortune would change soon after, escaping with another prisoner under the fog of darkness.
It was in the winter time. We had a hard time. For two months we travel, we walk. And then, then we got to American lines. We had to run back and forth. Americans were shooting us because I got mixed up with the Germans. It's something that you can't forget, yeah. And when I first went home, I used to jump, you know. I mean, when I sleep on account of shelling.
While Henry survived to retell his tales of war, he now pays tribute to those who didn't. The many sacrifices of human life helped build this, modern-day Ortona. The harbor city is thriving, with tourism, manufacturing, and a busy port. The downtown looks remarkably different from its appearance during the war, but signs of the conflict are still visible today. A large ceremony is held to commemorate the lives lost liberating Ortona. Led by the powerful tones of a piper, the delegation marches through the streets, the same passageways that soldiers navigated through decades ago.
It's very, very important. Noi siamo molto legati.
We are very indebted for what the very young Canadian soldiers did for Ortona. We recognize that they paid with their lives for our liberty.
Della nostra città.
For me as a piper, playing with a regiment, I think anytime I'm playing at a battle site, it always means a lot that I'm playing for the soldiers that fell. But Ortona in particular, I had the honor of serving for a couple of years with the Seaforth Highlanders in Vancouver, and Ortona is almost legendary in the regiment. To be playing through that street with actual veterans from the Italian campaign behind me, it's something I'll never forget.
spent all the Christmas season around Ortona, down below, just down below.
Supposedly we had turkey. There was a dispute whether it was turkey or pork, but the officer served us. And we had Canadian beer, and that Christmas I do remember.
Well, it wasn't like at home, but we had turkey for Christmas that year, and a bottle of beer, Canadian beer.
Where possible, soldiers were rotated back to a church to enjoy a hot meal. It was a welcome change from eating Spam and other canned meats. But while still in a battle, many were shot by German forces in their attempt. For those who returned safely, it was a moment to covet. This was Christmas Day, 1943.
Christmas was very special, of course. We always tried to have some Christmas dinner on the day. I happened to be one that decorated the Christmas table, and we were very fortunate. We went out and picked poinsettias, which we couldn't do in Canada, so I could decorate the tables with real poinsettias.
Fighting continued for months through an unusually frigid time in Italy.
It had been the coldest winter. They fought in very soft soil and mud.
Wet and muddy and cold.
The Battle of Ortona claimed over 1,300 Canadian soldiers, nearly 1/4 of all those who died in the Italian campaign.
This whole valley was taken by Canadians in a situation against all odds.
Ortona is won. The objective is Rimini.
Allied forces marched north with the goal of securing Rimini. The city was heavily fortified. Just to reach the outskirts was a major struggle. Canadians needed to go first through the Gothic Line, a German front that stretched from coast to coast. Upon breaking through, the Germans massed troops outside Rimini. Fighting continued day and night. After 3 weeks, the Nazis withdrew. Canadians entered the nearly deserted town on September 21st, 1944. Then the rains began to fall.
It must have been horrible for the boys because there was so much mud and, you know, they had to slog through so much. And we knew when they came in, they were so relieved to lie under canvas on a cot and see someone there, a nursing sister.
The mud complicated the struggle to keep moving forward and drive out the remaining Germans. With swampy conditions, troops and tanks were bogged down. This photo shows the muddy war zone with Augustus's Arch in the background. It continues to be a famous landmark in the heart of Rimini.
When I came through the actual area and saw what they had gone through, I was absent. I couldn't even talk about it. I still can't imagine what went on.
From Rimini, the Italian campaign continued with Allied forces invading the capital. It was the final front to fall. There was victory, but no Canadians were present to celebrate their own success. After liberating Rimini, Allied forces descended on Rome. The campaign continued until the spring of 1945, when victory in Italy was declared. But no Canadians were there to celebrate the triumph. A few months earlier, in February, the 1st Canadian Corps was moved to Northwest Europe to be reunited with the 1st Canadian Army. There they would join forces for the invasion of Germany and Holland. With troops out of Italy, the memory of the campaign quickly began to fade. Larger, more successful battles, such as storming the Normandy beaches in France, overshadowed efforts of the Italian campaign.
My parents told me this after I got home. Every day the headline was what was going on in Italy. You know, the Canadians in Italy. Although we didn't have any regiments from our hometown, but still it was a big news. After D-Day, we had to look on the back page to see if Italy was still in it. We were the forgotten ones.
An attitude that continues today.
We don't deal, for example, with military history.
In classrooms across the nation, one is hard-pressed to find a high school history curriculum that includes any information about Canadians fighting in Italy during World War II. The deadly sideshow cost nearly 6,000 lives. 3 Canadians were awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor, both a sacrifice and a triumph that's not being retold.
In terms of the individual battles, I would agree with the veterans that the remembrance of their particular battles, they're not going to be remembered because they're being taught in the school curriculum.
If acknowledgement or just simply knowledge of the campaign is waning in Canada, our soldiers' efforts are not forgotten in Italy. As the Canadian delegation holds ceremonies throughout the country, Italians come in crowds to add their respects, their gratitude, their thanks.
Everything was knocked down. And when the Canadian came through, they give us a lot of help. Food, everything.
We really appreciate it, and well, at that time they appreciated us too, and they still do.
When you come across here, we start smiling again. Thank you.
Standing right here, I mean, I can't help but notice every mountaintop has a story. And the Canadians shed their blood on these mountaintops. This valley is sacred Canadian soil. But I live here. I know what people say about Canadians. There is no forgotten campaign. People still remember the Canadians that gave shoes to my relatives, that gave food to our kids, and that fought for democracy.
It didn't matter where I was, there was victory. So I was just I was absolutely happy to be wherever I was. We were so thankful it was all over.
When the bell gets rung, we answer the call. And for so many who volunteered, they all volunteered to do this, to come over and liberate an unknown people in a country they probably just heard about through the most horrific conditions you could possibly imagine on earth. Just shows you the true spirit and dedication and love that Canadian people have for humanity and all. And let's face it, the average age is roughly 85 right now, and so it is sad that through time they'll pass on, but their memory lives on in plaques and dedications such as this.
All wars are forgotten wars. All campaigns are forgotten campaigns when they lose their impact, when we lose them in our memories.
Ask a local tour guide and they'll describe Italy as a young country. The rebuilding still continues after the ferocious bombing and warfare 6.5 decades ago. A profound point in history ever altering the Mediterranean country. Cemeteries still dot the countryside, home to thousands of lost lives. Canadians who fought proudly experienced the cruelty of war and eventually brought liberty to millions of people. A sacrifice forgotten by many, but never overshadowed in importance on either side of the Atlantic. There was victory in Italy.
At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember.